Good afternoon, friends. Great time of year. This Christmas tide. In Spanish, they call it Navidad. And we look forward to remembering what Jesus Christ has done for us and how he came to us in his first Advent. Advent means coming. And as he came to us, we received his blessing, and at the same time we remember his blessing every Christmas time. In the Bible, James, the brother of Jesus, says and writes to his friends, "Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and the latter rains. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is near." Waiting. James says to wait for the early and latter rains, as the farmer waits for sweet fruit. I don't know about you, but I have a problem with waiting. For example, I don't like waiting in lines. I don't like waiting in lines at the grocery store. I don't like sitting still on a freeway that's designed for me to be going 65 miles an hour. And especially, I don't like to wait in lines at the Department of Motor Vehicles because when you go to the DMV, you have to wait in line number 1 so that you can wait in line number 2 so that you can give them an exorbitant amount of money for a little tiny tag to put on your license plate. Well, James says that it's a sign of spiritual maturity to be patient and to wait. So often I don't feel too spiritual. However, I am ready for the coronavirus to be over. I'm growing impatient with waiting. Sheltering in place is a drag. In fact, the more that we shelter in place, the more that our dogs' little treats begin to look appetizing. Just kidding. Certainly, we're people that are in waiting. We long to be able to be free to hug one another at worship time and not wear face masks, but our time of waiting is nothing like the people of Israel had to go through. In fact, from the closing words of Malachi in the Old Testament to the opening chapter of Matthew in the New Testament, the Israelites waited through 400 years of silence. That's a stinking long time. Silence. Where was God? They must have thought, where are the prophets pointing the way to God's direction and hope? They were waiting in silence for God to do something, and it must have been depressing beyond words. The context of this time between the Testaments is one of the darkest times of Jewish history. At the close of Malachi, Israel had returned from their 7 years of captivity in Babylon. However, they escaped Babylon only to be taken captive in their own homeland by the Medes and the Persians. And by the time that Matthew began to write of the coming of the Christ child, Israel was under the iron fist of the Romans. Palestine was occupied and the Jews were oppressed by them. During those 400 years, pagan empires rose and fell. In fact, 4 different conquering oppressors invaded and controlled the traditional homeland of the Jews. During this dark time, Alexander the Great managed to conquer what seemed to be the entire world, yet he couldn't conquer Jerusalem. And the Old Testament was, during this time, translated into Greek from Hebrew, which was pivotal to the Bible being translated for everyone in the known world at that time to read and to understand. At the end of the 400 years of silence, God's people were weary of the wait. God had abandoned them. Actually, he had not abandoned them, but they thought so. Many Jews had taken up arms against the oppressors. The impatient Maccabees had revolted against the Romans in 160 BC, and then had been isolated and destroyed in the mountain fortress of Masada in 75 BC. This was all part of the consciousness of the Israelites in the days of Herod, as Luke says, Herod the Great. And Herod was not great because he was wise and thoughtful leader. Herod had rebuilt the temple in 70 BC, but the sacrificial system had not been reinstated, and the people of God still languished in their longing and waiting. The hope for the long-promised Messiah that Isaiah had prophesied some 600 years earlier was certainly a dream they thought would never come about. All of these things worked together to create a world that was hungry and desperate for change, a world that lived in spiritual and political darkness and hopelessness. And yet, when the time was right, God sent his Son to earth, the baby boy. When all hope was lost and the world was at its darkest, God showed up in a totally unexpected way. Paul wrote later in his letter to the church of Galatia, "But when the fullness of time had come, the fullness of time, that God sent forth his Son," Galatians 4:4, "in order to redeem us." Here in the impatient season of waiting, the fullness of time was to be determined by the promises that God had given through the prophets. And these promises were filled with hope. God had even set an appointed time for the fulfillment of these promises, though he had not revealed the fullness of time to anyone, not even to the prophets. In 1 Peter chapter 1, Peter writes, "Concerning this salvation, the prophets spoke of the grace that was to come to you. They searched intently with great care, attempting to discern the seasons and circumstances to which the Spirit of Christ in them was pointing when he predicted the sufferings of the Messiah. Furthermore, they sought to discern the times and the glory that was to follow in his coming. It was revealed to them that they were not serving themselves, but were serving you, when they spoke of the things that they have now been told you by those who have preached the gospel to you. This has been accomplished by the Holy Spirit that was sent to you from heaven. Even the angels long to look into these things." 1 Peter 1:10 through 12. Waiting for the fullness of time required centuries of patience because God was working according to his own calendar. He obviously measures the times and seasons quite differently than we do. So waiting. This is a reminder that God's purposes never end. And he always is working, even when it seems that we are waiting on him in silence, wondering where he might be. We wait for the light to penetrate our darkness. In Jesus' day, the world was hopeless. And that's when God showed up. That's what he did then, and that's what he does now. His love for his people never changes. His love is steadfast, and his purposes endure forever. When we find ourselves in a season of waiting, it's good to remember that God is present in the silence. In fact, he's still hard at work, weaving together plans and purposes that only he knows. So I'm wondering today, do you feel like God has gone silent on you? Have you been waiting a long, long time to have him come and heal you? Come and save? Come and restore? Let's remember today that he's still at work, right now. Even when we can't see it, even if you are still waiting on God. May the Lord bless you in this wonderful Advent season.